Hey, we're the Fantasy Football Prophets back here with another video. Today we're going to be talking about this season's dark horse fantasy football players. Before we get started, we want to clarify so that we're all on the same page. Rob, what is a dark horse?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of qualify or quantify what a dark horse would be, but unlike a sleeper, a dark horse is more of a diamond in the rough. It's somebody who's going to be a little bit more of a surprise than your typical guy who's a quality player but suddenly has a breakout year. Oftentimes a dark horse may be a player who actually goes undrafted in your draft. And there's a lot of dark horses. We think about Anquan Bolden back in the day. We think about players like Antonio Gates and others or Arian Foster, who actually went undrafted, and they came out of nowhere. And so we're going to really dig deep to give you some dark horses, guys that we think can really overachieve this year, surprise some other teams, guys that we think you should keep an eye on. Now, before we get into Christian's first pick there, we really want to kind of stretch this a bit. We don't want to give you the obvious picks, things that you can figure out on your own. And I think back to early in my fantasy football years, in the early 90s, and fantasy football was beginning to take on, it's beginning to create a lot of momentum. And so newspapers back in the day wanted to kind of jump on that hype. So what they started doing was on Saturday and Sunday morning, they put out articles in their sports section that would discuss players they thought you should start. And I always thought that they kind of insulted my intelligence because they would come out and they would say things like, this weekend we think Emmitt Smith is a good start. And I remember reading that thinking, everybody or anybody who knows anything about football understands Emmitt Smith is a good start. What I want from you is some different information. I want you to go deeper. And so we don't want to insult your intelligence. You don't need me to tell you that Drew Brees, if he has the right year, could end up being the #1 quarterback. I mean, that's easily attainable for him. Or how McCoy, if he gets the right breaks, could end up scoring better than Bell or Johnson or Ezekiel Elliott. I think we could all see that's well within the realm of possibilities. And so we want to go a lot deeper, okay, and make you consider some things maybe that you've never considered and get away from some of those safer picks. But before we get into mine, Christian, why don't you start by giving us your first dark horse?
All right, so it's funny you should say that. My first dark horse is actually one of the more well-known of these fantasy players, and it's Eli Manning, and I'll tell you why he's a dark horse. So Eli Manning is a dark horse because right now, according to ADP, he's being ranked as the 17th overall quarterback, and that's just absurd. He's been getting a lot of hate over recent years, and I think a lot of people don't respect him, but let's just look at the numbers straight up, because you have to take your bias and you have to kind of throw it out the window when you're playing fantasy football if you'd like to succeed. First thing is that he is an underrated quarterback, at least as far as fantasy goes. I'm not saying whether or not he should or shouldn't be your franchise quarterback, but he puts up good fantasy numbers. Over the last 3 years, he has averaged over 600 passing attempts, over 4,000 yards, and 30 touchdowns. Those are good numbers, and he's done it averaging over 3 years, so that's also some consistency. Reason number two that he's being extremely underrated at 17 is that he has Odell Beckham Jr., arguably the #1 receiver in the NFL, or at least probably the #2 or #3. He has Brandon Marshall, probably a Hall of Fame wide receiver, a guy who has had an unbelievable career with 8 1,000-yard receiving seasons in his 11 career years. Shepard, he's a young wide receiver who could blossom into be another elite wide receiver, and he's the third guy on the depth chart. And finally is Evan Ingram. That tight end is so athletic. He's another weapon that they have. That is probably the best receiving corps in the NFL. So many options, so much talent. It's hard to underrate Eli Manning. The only way that I could imagine him not having much value is if the Giants didn't throw the ball much. But the Giants do throw the ball, and they throw the ball a ton. First of all, every year he is in his career, he basically throughout his years he has averaged in the top 10 for passing attempts. So he's getting a lot of chances to go out there, and this year is no different. They still haven't figured out their run game. They still don't have their star running back. They never have. Their identity on that offense is their passing game. So I hated to call Eli Manning a dark horse because he's so well known, but he's also so underrated. I mean, 17th overall, I think you gotta rate him higher than that. He's just got so much going for him, but he seems to get a lot of hate. So yeah, that's my first guy. Now, Rob, who is your first guy?
Okay, so I'm going to go really, really deep here. Really dark horse. I love to do this. I love to dig down and find that guy that nobody else had. So my first dark horse is going to be tight end Rico Gathers of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, here's why I like Rico. He was drafted in 2016 in the 6th round, 217th by the Dallas Cowboys. One, the guy's got freakish size, 6'6", 290 pounds. So this guy is going to cause all sorts of matchup issues. But he doesn't lack athleticism. He was a basketball player in college. Now, he had a quiet rookie year, which is expected, and we'll find out why he had a quiet rookie year. Now, during last preseason, he only got to see 16 snaps, and he caught one ball for 8 yards. But in Thursday's game already, in the first preseason game for Dallas against Arizona Cardinals, he had 3 catches for 59 yards, and he had a 26-yard TD. Right now, he's looking great in the preseason. He's getting more looks and touches. In fact, he's quadrupled already the amount of snaps he's seeing. Now, Coach Garrett had said this. He's gotten much better. If you remember, when we drafted Rico, he hadn't played football since junior high. Obviously, a really, really good athlete, college basketball player at Baylor. He was a great rebounder. We all saw the athleticism. The thing that was impressed us was his tremendous willingness to work and work all parts of his game. Now he's come a long way. He has a long way to go. Now here's why I like Rico. You know who he reminds me a lot of? Antonio Gates. Okay. Now Antonio Gates was a little bit smaller at 6'4", 260. So already he's got 2 more inches on Gates. Like Rico, Gates, after being told by scouts he was kind of what they call a tweener for the NBA, that they didn't think he could quite make it, he tried out for the NFL. And since he never played college football, right, as many as 19 teams were believed to have contacted Gates about a tryout. Chose to work out for San Diego, made the team. Of course, we know the rest is history. Now, when Antonio Gates came into the league, he was less impressive as rookie. In fact, his rookie year, he only had like 20 catches for like 200 and some yards. Very unimpressive, right? But he came out his second year, and he took off. Antonio Gates had 81 catches, 964 yards, and 13 TDs, and he's a Hall of Famer. And so I see a lot of parallels there in the two players as far as coming in, basketball, converting to tight end. I see a lot of potential in this guy. He's already making great strides. And he's in a great situation with Jason Witten there, because Jason's been a great tight end, but he's at the end of his career. Mm-hmm. And, maybe this is last year for him. How productive he can be, who knows? Once again, I really like that. So keep an eye on Rico Gathers, tight end of Dallas. That's my deep, dark horse right there for you. Christian, who's your next guy?
All right, so my next guy is wide receiver Willie Snead. Now, Willie Snead is a guy who has been undervalued throughout his career quite consistently. First of all, a lot of people undervalue that he has proven himself to be talented. Since joining the NFL, he's had over 100 targets, both in the 2 seasons that he's been in. He's averaged 70.5 receptions and averaged 940 yards receiving. And that's in just 15 games, both of his years. So that's basically what he's averaging. Those are pretty great numbers. But those numbers get even more increased when you look at the fact that he was actually a third-string wide receiver for those first 2 years. A third-string wide receiver who is averaging 940 yards and 70 catches, that's insane. The reason I like him so much is that his role is going to be increased this year. Now that Cooks is leaving, he is now going to be the number 2 guy. And so I think Cooks is taking with him over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. That's a lot of kind of slack, as I'd like to say, for Willie Snead to be able to pick up. There's a lot of receptions and targets and opportunity for him to take over as the number 2 guy. For the people out there who might say that there's no way that 2 receivers on that team, Michael Thomas and Willie Snead, could both have 1,000 yards, because we know Michael Thomas will have 1,000 yards, I would tell them to look at last year when Brandon Cooks and Michael Thomas both had 1,000 yards easily, and Willie Snead still almost had 1,000 yards. So there is more than enough to go around. With a quarterback like Drew Brees, who is a consistent 5,000-yard passer, in fact, he's had 5 5,000-yard seasons, which is just unbelievable. There is nothing in my mind, no doubt that there can be 2 1,000-yard receivers there. Like I said, finally, somebody has to pick up what Cooks left behind. 78 catches, 8 touchdowns, 1,100 yards. I think Snead is very underrated. He's very talented, and now he's finally going to get his opportunity to play a lot more and to kind of pick up that slack that's leaving in Brandon Cooks. So that's my number 2 guy. Rob, who's your next guy?
Okay, so I'm going to get a lot of hatred for this one, but here's my number 2 dark horse. And he was retired, and he just came out of retirement, and that's quarterback Jay Cutler of the Miami Dolphins. So here's why I like Jay Cutler, okay? One, it's easy to hate on this guy, and overall I'm not a big Jay Cutler fan in terms of like football. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but in terms of fantasy football, I think he's very underrated. Okay, now if you take a look at his entire career, and you take into account his rushing touchdowns, his passing touchdowns, you look at the games that he played, it turns out to be a touchdown rate on average of about 1.6 TDs per game. If you project that out over 16 games, that's about 25 passes per year on average as far as what he's accumulating statistically for fantasy football. 25 touchdown passes a year on average. He's had 28 and 27 touchdown passes as kind of his high water mark. And so this is a guy that can produce. Okay, so we already know that. In fact, they just did a recent study where they took him and they compared his numbers to Hall of Famer Troy Aikman. And they found out that Jay Cutler's numbers were profoundly better than Troy Aikman's. Profoundly better. It wasn't even close. So something to consider. Here's another reason why I like him. He goes into a good situation. Now, I know right now Matt Moore is technically the #1 guy with Tannehill out. But everybody knows they brought Jay Cutler. In fact, the coach said they didn't bring Jay in to sit on the sideline. So we all know that they're going to work him into being the starting guy.
Well, I like that you said that they didn't pay him $10 million to sit on the bench. So, yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money to be a backup. He's not going to be the backup. He's going to be the starter. He goes into a great situation. He has a good complement of weapons. Jarvis Landry, Devontae Parker, which, by the way, they say Parker looks great so far. And they've had a ton of talent. He's got Kenny Stills, J.I.J., Julius Thomas. So he's got a good complement of weapons there to work with, and probably better weapons than he's had in quite a few years playing for Chicago, where you had Alshon Jeffries, but a lot of times he was injured, and then they had White, and he was injured. So this is really the first time he's had any good weapons around him in a while. He plays the Jets twice, and the Jets are just a brutal team in rebound. And he also plays the Patriots twice, which might look bad, but I actually think it's a great fit because I tell you what, to me, any team that plays the Patriots most likely is going to have to get into a shootout just to win games, so I have no problem with that. I will say this about him. I like him as a dark horse. I would draft him. Okay, he's not a guy that I would draft, okay? But here's a guy that I would look at. If you're somebody who maybe starts the year and right away you have, God forbid, a season-ending injury to your quarterback, he'll be out there. He's a guy that you could pick up for injury. Or maybe you're a guy who after your draft you got Aaron Rodgers. But you take a look at your team and you realize you're lacking for running backs or wideouts. You could trade a guy like Aaron Rodgers and go with Jay Cutler, who's going to have a decent year for you, and yet pick up some talent. Or the other thing you could look at is a bye-week fill-in for Jay Cutler. Once again, last year at menus, you look at how many guys went undrafted that had great years. Last year in a lot of the leagues, Matt Ryan went undrafted. Last year, Dak Prescott went undrafted. And the year before that, David Carr was undrafted. And so he's a guy that's going to go undrafted, but I think he could have a very, very good year. He's my dark horse, Jay Cutler. Christian, who's your next guy?
All right, so my next guy is Zach Ertz. The reason I like Zach Ertz is for a few reasons. First of all, in years past, people have liked Zach Ertz, and this year his kind of likability has dropped a lot. In years past, he was being drafted, 8th or 7th at the tight end position, but now it's dropped down to almost 12th as far as ADP goes. And I think that's just a terrible, terrible understanding, kind of a proof of burn bias. People have looked at him in years past, and it hasn't done what they've expected, and so they back off. But let's look at these numbers from a less biased approach, and we'll see kind of some better information on. First of all, last year he dealt with a rookie quarterback in Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz showed that I think he could be an NFL quarterback, a viable Super Bowl winner, who knows. But I think that he proved he's got some talent, Carson Wentz does, but he's going to take a step up this year, which is going to help everyone in that offense. Additionally, Zach Ertz was Carson Wentz's second favorite target. Now, it's not very often that a tight end is a quarterback's second favorite target, so that speaks volumes for Zach Ertz's talent and how much they use him in that offense, which is huge. A lot of times, talent and opportunity becomes more important. A lot of guys just sit on the bench with lots of talent and don't do you much. Another thing that's really important, last year he played just 14 games, and 2 of those games he played, he was kind of banged up. One of those games wasn't a full game because he got hurt, and one of them he came back, he was still working in the role. But in just those 14 games, he got 78 catches, 106 targets, 816 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now you project that by adding 2 more healthy games, and 2 more games total, basically, to give him 16 full games where he's not banged up at all. I think those numbers put him over 1,000 receiving yards, maybe 8 touchdowns, so excited to see what he can do. Another thing that kind of goes without saying is that Carson Wentz is a year older, and he's gonna improve. He's gonna take a step forward, at least I think. Guess that's nothing I can guarantee. But another thing that I really like about Zach Ertz, and this is my final point, I like his variety of targets. You see some tight ends that are only good in the red zone. There are some tight ends that are fast and they're only good outside of the red zone, but I like what Zach Ertz is able to do. So last year he got 11 catches of over 20 yards or more, which is 4th among tight ends. That's impressive. But he also had 14 red zone targets, which is tied for the most red zone targets for the Eagles. So I like that he can play anywhere on the field. He's physical, he's got a big body, and he's proven himself. He can just stay on the field. So that's my third guy, Zach Ertz. Rob, who's your next guy?
Well, why don't you go ahead and click. So here's my next guy. It's Kenny Britt. He's going to be my next dark horse. Now, a lot of people felt like last year was really a statistical anomaly, a fluke. They were shocked he had 1,000 yards. Now, if you read our site, if you went to fantasyfootballprofits.com, that's profits with an S, last year I pegged him as a guy that I think you should keep an eye on, and sure enough, he had a good year. Now, a lot of people thought that last year was kind of an off year, a fluke. A lot of people forget he was actually a #1 pick. He was a first-round draft pick at one point. He's got great size, okay, at 6'3", 225. And he's still only 28 years old, so this guy still got many good years in terms of being a wide receiver. Here's the other thing that many people don't realize with Kenny Britt being a first-round pick, great size. This guy, early in his career, really started off and had a great career. Now, as a rookie, he played 16 games. He had 701 yards and 3 TDs, and that's a decent rookie year. It's not spectacular. He follows it up in his second year. Now, he only plays 12 games his second year, but in those 12 games, he has 775 yards and 9 TDs. Okay, so he's trending upwards. He's getting better. He looks like he could become the #1 guy. In his third season, this guy really blossoms into a #1 guy. He was dominant. And here's the game log for the first 2 games he played the year. First game, 5 catches, 136 yards, 2 TDs. Second game, 9 catches, 135 yards, 1 TD. And the third game, he already had a few catches, was looking good, and he tears his ACL. Now, at that point, after 3 games, he was actually leading the league in yards, catches, and TDs before he tore his ACL. Now, after he tore his ACL, it took him a couple years to get back from the injury, to get healthy. Well, then what happened is after that, his stats really tanked. And so a lot of people thought, well, maybe he's not that good. Maybe he'll never get back the way he was before. But I really think that's a byproduct of playing in some terrible offenses with some bad quarterbacks. He played for St. Louis and Tennessee. And last year, even last year when he had 1,000 yards, his quarterbacks were Keenum and Jeff Goff. And so you take a look at who he's had throwing him the ball, and I really think that's why he's been hindered there. Another thing I think that's huge, it speaks a lot to the way teams view him and the type of talent that he has, is Cleveland let Pryor go last year. A wide receiver who came out and looked great. People loved him in Cleveland. He wanted to stay there. They let him go, and they went ahead and signed and put that money to Kenny Britt. To me, that says a lot about how they value him. Here's the other thing I like about his situation. Cleveland, let's just be honest, they're going to play from behind a lot. And so I think you're going to get a lot of garbage time stats with him. And once again, I think that this is a guy that could surprise a few people. He could become a #1 guy. He could become a top 20. I wouldn't say he's going to be a top 5, top 10, but I could definitely see him cracking the top 20. Last year wasn't a fluke. He's talented. He used to be a #1 pick. He is the real deal. Last year was an anomaly. Dark horse for me. Keep an eye on Kenny Britt. This guy's got all the talent.
Yeah, this is one of those picks that you make late in the draft, and it makes all the difference in the world. He could be a #3 starting wideout for you, or add some depth to your wideout if you have quite good wideouts or whatever. But these are the sort of dark horse picks that take your team from good to great and help you win championships. So, never go into the draft thinking that all the elite players are gone and that's it. There's still gems like Kenny Britt, and I can't agree with you anymore. So,
yeah, before you get into that, I want to say, you're absolutely right. It's really hard to screw up the first and second round. Honestly, if you get the first 5, 10 picks, almost anybody you take is going to be fine, but you're going to win or lose your season based on those later picks. That's going to be all the difference in the world. So, go ahead.
All right, yeah, so my next guy is a rookie running back, but he hasn't gotten quite as much of attention as some of the other guys. That's Joe Mixon, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, there's a lot of talent in this running back class, and we were actually joking around earlier that this is the greatest running back class ever, and I think it's a great running back class. We haven't seen one as talented in such a long time, and I think that in any other class, Joe Mixon would be highlighted as an elite rookie player, and a lot of people would love to take him early, but he's being overshadowed by Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook, and there are just so many young, talented players coming out of this draft that kind of began to overshadow him. Additionally, he was a second-round pick, and that makes a lot of people nervous. If he's not a first-round pick, I might as well take the first-round pick running back, but let's not forget that the reason he was a second-round pick was due to off-field issues, which luckily he doesn't have anymore. So that's my first thing. off-field issues are gone. We don't have to worry about those. That was something that really made a lot of people nervous about players, and I completely understand. But it was his only off-field issue, and I think that you shouldn't jump ship on this player until his second, or it becomes a pattern of kind of disrespect and misbehaving on the off-field. But it's only a one-time thing, and we've only heard good news about him since then. And that's kind of why he fell in the draft. In fact, there was talk that the Bengals in the first round had talked about taking Mixon, and they discussed whether or not they would have taken Fournette or Mixon if they got there. And they actually said that they would have rather had Mixon anyways. But then Fournette was taken, and then they realized they could get Mixon in the second round due to the off-field issues, and so they waited and they took him. Additionally, Coach Lewis is loving him. In fact, he just said this. He says his personality, his work ethic, how he comes and approaches practice every day, I love it. So that right there, he's kind of as a coach's favorite, a wonderkins. They love him. He fits great in that offense. I love that he's a dual threat. His last season playing college football, he combined for 15 touchdowns and 1,800 yards. 5 of those touchdowns and over 500 yards were receiving the ball. And nowadays that becomes far more important. And then finally, the last two things are that, first of all, he lost 10 pounds. They wanted him to lose 10 pounds and get a little bit quicker, and he did that for them under a month. It took him less than a month, and they say he's in better shape than he's ever been in. Finally, Bernard and Hill have been less than impressive. Bernard is still recovering from his ACL tear, and Hill, the last 2 seasons, only averaged 3.7 yards per carry, and they're just looking for another option because their running backs for a while there were pretty bad. So, this is a guy who's gotten a lot of hate, basically, mostly because of off-field issues that are gone now, and I think that he can stay away from those. He's going to be a great option. Rob, who's your final guy?
Yeah, so before I get to my final guy there, it's interesting that you're talking about running backs. This is a strong class of running backs. And but I'm going to stay away from some of the more obvious picks. I'm not going to talk about McCaffrey, Cook, Mixon, Fournette, some of those guys. I'm going to start talking about, I'm going to go to Packer territory there. I'm going to talk about the Green Bay Packers, but before I get to my pick, I want to say this. I'm not really sold on Ty Montgomery. I think it was a great story last year. He had great yards per carry. But I think if you look at some game film and you watch him, what you would notice that the reason why his yards per carry was so elevated was a lot of those runs were on longer plays where it was a draw play or running plays while the offense was in a spread formation and defense were playing the pass. Now, what I wonder at this point for Ty, obviously he's got the quickness, he's got the ability, but does he have the stamina to be an every down running back? And I have to really question if that's possible. And once again, there's a reason why he was drafted as a wideout. And so to me, that leaves a lot of question mark. Now, the player that I'm looking at is somebody I would say is a late steal. Somebody that maybe your last pick in the draft that you'd put on your bench stash and just see how he plays himself out. And that leads me to my final dark horse, and that's running back Jamal Williams of Green Bay. So he says at 6 foot, 213 pounds, so he's got decent size. He's not a big back, but he's not too light. He was a 4th rounder out of BYU, and he had a very good college career. Now, some of the news right now out of Packer camp is this. They're saying right now that he's beginning to push Montgomery for snaps. That's according to ESPN. And then offensive coordinator Edgar Bennett said Williams has already earned some first-team work at training camp because his ability in pass protection. Now, usually when running backs struggle to get into the game and get some touches and get looks, it's because they're struggling at picking up pass coverage and blocking schemes, things like that. It's usually not their ability to run the ball, okay? They're saying right here he's doing great in pass protection, so right away he's getting more touches, more opportunities to get on the field. Goes on to say that that's the Packers' biggest concern when it comes to Montgomery. They actually go on to say that Montgomery had great yards per carry, but he really struggled in pass protection. And so this guy's going to get a lot of opportunities to block.
If you mind if I just add something in there, on most teams that might not make as big of a difference as it does for Green Bay, who passes the ball so much. And so don't undervalue that. That's a great point.
Yeah.
I'll let you continue and not take your points away.
No, that's a great point. And yeah, I mean, they're going to throw the ball 40, 50 times a game. And so if you can't pass block, you're not going to be in the game. That's the bottom line. And then the other thing so far, Williams is looking great right now in camp. They're saying explosive. He looks good. He's learning the offense. And it's not like he's trying to unseat a veteran running back who's been there for years. All he has to do is leapfrog Ty Montgomery, who has a lot of question marks going into this year. And so he's a guy that I would say keep an eye on. He's a guy that maybe you take in your very last pick, you stash on your bench, and you might get yourself a real late steal.
All right, yeah, so once again, those are our dark horse players for this season. We're really excited about those guys. A lot of those guys you can draft way later than you should, and we think they're going to outperform what they've done in the past. As always, we thank you guys so much for watching our video. Rob, do you have anything to say before we close out?
No, I think that's it. Football season's getting closer. We're excited. We're having a big, I see the last couple of days, there's been more preseason games, so we're excited. Thanks for joining.